Your Excellencies, have a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the kickoff of Winterfest, the Alumni Weekend. Although, given the mild temperature, I feel like it's probably more appropriate to welcome you to the Alumni Spring Fling. For those of us who have spent time in Boston, we appreciate that this is a very unique experience on the 27th of January, wouldn't you say? I'm one that does not shy from taking credit. So you can believe that it is the fact that we are launching our 10th commemorative edition of our State of Africa report, and we have these excellencies with us, is the reason that we're enjoying this balmy day. As I mentioned a moment ago, we are launching our 10th African Leaders State of Africa report tonight. We decided to do something different other than a typical press event. We thought that it would serve as a great backdrop to have a real-time conversation about the real Africa. I'd also like to note that tonight also marks the launch of the rebranding of our center. For those of you who've had experience and being engaged with us over our 10-year history, we inaugurated this institution as the African Presidential Archives and Research Center, which is a mouthful, wouldn't you agree? But we felt it was important to try to capture in the name of the center the expanse of our work, because when we launched, we were a unique institution, which saw the value of engaging former African heads of state because of the unique insights that they brought, the unique window that they represented in order to view Africa in a different way. Now that we've been at this for 10 years, we've established our bona fides. People from around the world, institutions from around the world look toward us as it relates to current trends and developments on the continent. We felt we'd shorten it just a little bit, be a little bit more descriptive of our work. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, you have the privilege and opportunity to attend the first event of the African Presidential Center at Boston University. Give yourselves a hand for coming out tonight. Along with this relaunch, our staff has encouraged me to take an even greater step into the 21st century, which means that we're also launching our Facebook page and Twitter feed. So I will be tweeting beginning in the next couple of days. I leave tomorrow night for a 9-country swing through Africa, where we will be doing similar launches relative to the State of Africa report. And so with a little help from my friends, I'll be able to tweet you all the way through that 6-week experience. Tweet. I'm getting there. Now, let us move into the more formal proceedings of the evening. Although I would like to stress that this evening's conversation is intended to be an informal but real conversation among friends, I do want to express a word of profound appreciation to my three dear colleagues and friends who have joined us this evening. His Excellency Steve Matenje, the Ambassador of the Republic of Malawi to the United States of America. Her Excellency Tebelelo Seretse, the Ambassador of the Republic of Botswana to the United States of America. And the Honorable Walter Carrington, former United States Ambassador to Senegal and Nigeria. Please join me in giving them a rousing round of applause. Ambassador Seretse assumed the position of Ambassador of Botswana to the United States on February the 14th, 2011. Now, you appreciate that that's Valentine's Day. And so I guess it is appropriate to say that this relationship between Botswana and the United States personified in her is a real love affair. Ambassador Seretse has served as a member of Parliament and the cabinet under the former president of Botswana, Festus Mogae, from 1999 to 2004. President Mogae, in addition to being the recipient of the Mo Ibrahim African Leadership Prize, also served as one of the African Presidential Center's presidents in residence. In addition to her extensive work in the public sector, Ambassador Seretse has also contributed significantly to the private sector in Botswana, serving on the board of the Bank of Botswana, the Botswana Diamond Mining Company, Debswana, Botswana Insurance Holding Company, and Excess Petroleum. She also served as the head of the African delegation to the 4th World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference in Doha in 2001. Let's give her another round of applause. Ambassador Matenje became ambassador of the Republic of Malawi to the United States of America on September the 16th, 2010. The same day he presented letters of credence to the United States, presented letters of credence to the United States President Barack Obama. He is also accredited to the Bahamas, Canada, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Puerto Rico on a non-residential basis. Prior to his appointment as Malawi's envoy to the United States, Ambassador Matenje served as the ambassador and permanent representative of the Republic of Malawi to the United Nations from November 2006 to May 2010. He previously served as Solicitor General of Malawi and Permanent Secretary in Malawi's Ministry of Justice from September 1995 to July 2006. Let's give him another round of applause. Ambassador Carrington has, for more than a half century, been a specialist in African affairs. President Carter appointed him as U.S. Ambassador to Senegal in 1980. President Clinton named him as ambassador to Nigeria in 1993. There, during his 4-year tenure, he gained such a reputation as an outspoken champion for human rights against the oppressive military dictatorship that upon restoration of democratic rule, the enclave housing the American embassy and a dozen other diplomatic missions in Lagos was named Walter Carrington Crescent. Currently, he is an associate at Harvard's W.E.B. Du Bois Institute, where he is working on a book on Nigeria, the working title, A Duty to Speak, Refusing to Remain Silent in a Time of Tyranny, a collection of Ambassador Carrington's speeches challenging military rule and promoting human rights in democracy. It was published in 2010 at a state banquet, or it was announced in Nigeria in 2010 at a state banquet in his honor on his 80th birthday. Now, it goes without saying, and I've got to punctuate this, doesn't he look good? Give him another round of applause. Now, I'm going to step from behind this podium, and I'm going to have a seat and join my colleagues, and we're going to let this conversation begin. When we look at the news about Africa, it tends to be dominated by headlines like those that we included in our invitation as a way of enticing people to participate in this conversation. Headlines like Mugabe's bloody path to victory in Zimbabwe, which was a headline out of the Washington Post. Somali pirates, dead hostages in the failed on-ship negotiation, which appeared in the New York Times. North Nigeria reeling after riots, the BBC. Our mantra at the African Presidential Center is that Africa is more than the sum of its problems. Botswana, Malawi, and Nigeria are examples of this. So I'd open by asking you, in what ways do Botswana, Malawi, and Nigeria represent the hopeful news out of Africa?
Should I start?
Yes, sir. You can start, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Stith. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me and my colleagues to come to Boston this evening. I was first here in 2010. I remember when my President Mutharika, presented a lecture here in 2010. It's great to be back, and thank you for your kind introduction. Malawi is located in Southeast Africa. We are a country of about 15 million people, characterized as a poor country, low income, but we are part of Africa. And Africa itself has been described in many ways in the press, especially in the West. It has been characterized as a hopeless continent, poor, a continent full of armed conflict, a continent that uses child soldiers to fight, a continent full of coup d'etats, military governments, a continent renowned for blood diamonds, famine, drought, natural disasters, and other calamities, including HIV and AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, terrorism, and in short, a continent which is extremely poor in poverty. All those descriptions, sadly, have been true. We have heard all those things, and I don't think we can deny that. But the good news is that something is happening in Africa. We are now beginning to see a new Africa, what my President Mutharika calls an Africa of a new beginning. And this new beginning has been emerging for quite a number of years. Unfortunately, it seems it has not been picked up very clearly by the media, and hence the titles, the headlines which you have just mentioned, Ambassador Stith, which make depressing reading and which make all of us from Africa feel very, very sad. But on the other side, those descriptions have energized some of us, the new crop of leaders in Africa, our leaders in Africa, to rethink and think seriously about developing the continent. I will begin by describing to you from where we're coming. I'll begin with the Organization of African Unity, which was established over 50 years ago in order to bring together newer independent countries which were becoming independent especially in the 60s, after Ghana became independent in 1957. The OAU was essentially a political organization. It emphasized on political independence, breaking African countries away from colonialism, which had been with us for a long time. So the OAU emphasized on political independence. Africans should rule themselves, should decide their own destiny. Unfortunately, that led in most African countries to autocracy and dictatorship. So for the first 30, 40, 50 years after the establishment of the OAU, we seem to have been in the doldrums. And that's why perhaps all these descriptions have come about.
Ambassador, let me see if I can get, because the history is important and it gives some context. But Botswana was one of those countries that seemed to get it right on the governance issue coming out of the box. Ambassador Seretse, give us a little sense of that hopeful news coming out of Botswana.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all of you. I think particularly yourselves, and I want to believe that the majority of you are students, you have to always try to compare like with like. How old is America? I don't even know the answer myself, but I know 200 years you must have clocked.
Oh, yes.
Most and the majority of the African countries that you are talking about today, particularly if you look at Southern Africa, are less than 50 years old. So they are babies. And if today you turn and you look at the problems that the United States has, you can imagine how far behind Africa in totality is. However, it is always important not to talk about Africa. It is important to talk about countries in Africa. The problem we have seen is that because the United States is subdivided into states, when somebody takes the map of Africa and applies it to the map of America, they think that those are stage 2. Now, Africa is made up of different countries which have different governance. Some have done well, some have not done so well. But at the end of the day, it is always important to say how old are these countries. Botswana was very fortunate to have visionary leaders. And let me teach you that Botswana's democracy, it's not the European type of democracy. We have what is called the Kotla. I've prepared a brief paper, don't worry, they'll share it with you after this. The Kotla is an open traditional court where there's a plaintiff and there's a defendant. We also use the Kotla for consultation. The person who heads the Kotla is the chief. But all of you are welcome to participate in the Kotla. Not only to participate to sit, but to participate to talk and comment about whatever is going on and criticize whoever you wish to criticize, but with another concept that we call botho, humanity. Respect somebody else's opinion, respect somebody else's different point of view. So when we talk about tolerance, when we talk about freedom of speech, when we talk about freedom of association, they are not ethos and ethics that we learned from the Europeans. They are part of our culture. We practice them, and because we practice them, we have sayings that anyone and everyone. It's allowed to differ. But when you criticize somebody else, you have to criticize them with respect. We were one of the few countries which became a British colony by choice. We wished and feared not to be annexed into South Africa. So our chiefs went to the British. I'm told that the first time they got there, it was the first time they saw the mirror. So when they saw their own reflections in the mirror, they greeted and said, oh, here are our countrymen. Because they didn't know about the mirror, that there is a thing called a mirror. So they went and asked for protection, and Britain agreed to protect us. Botswana sits right on top of South Africa. It is landlocked, sharing the border with South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia. Those of you who know history know that Zimbabwe was the then Rhodesia, practicing apartheid. Namibia was the then Southwest Africa, practicing apartheid. All of us know about South Africa. So we were challenged. Come 1966, we went back to Britain and said, we think we are ready to govern ourselves. They said, au revoir. They actually didn't even understand why our chiefs didn't want to be incorporated and to become a Bantustan. So they said goodbye. But those visionary leaders had discovered diamonds. They started mining them. I bet you, Ambassador, if they had known then that we had diamonds, they wouldn't have let us go. So they said goodbye. So when they said goodbye, we had less than 5 kilometers of tarred road. We started putting institutions of governance, applying our culture to the institutions. And this is why today Botswana is a shining example of democracy, providing free education, free medical health, and beating the United States on the Peace Index. When Botswana ranks in the 30s, the United States ranks in the 60s. The least corrupt country on the African continent.
Thank you, Ambassador Seretse, Ambassador Matinje. Let's get Ambassador Carrington in here. We leave Botswana now, which got the governance thing right from the very beginning, and we're in Nigeria now. When you were there, as I related in the introduction, you were an outspoken advocate for human rights and justice. Sonny Abacha was the head of Nigeria then, and not a kind fellow, to put it mildly. Now, Nigeria has had several cycles of democratic elections. What say ye about this transition that we see taking place in Nigeria now?
Well, I think, first of all, let me congratulate you, Ambassador Stith, on the 10th anniversary of the African Presidential Center. I think it's a very important organization, and I think events like this help to educate the people of the Boston area about Africa and about what is happening. In terms of Nigeria, I think there's a few things that one needs to understand. 1 of every 5 Africans is a Nigerian. Nigeria is one of the largest countries in the world. It ranks among the top 10. It has a population of 170 million people. It is the 5th largest source of petroleum imports into the United States. And in fact, at one time in the 1970s, when there was the boycott of oil to the United States, Nigeria stood up and became, for a while, our #1 supplier of oil. So it has been very important to the United States in that regard. In fact, when Nigeria became independent, the ambassador was telling us about how Botswana asked the British for protection from being absorbed into South Africa. When Nigeria became independent and was entering the United Nations, the normal practice is for the representative of the colonial power to introduce to the United Nations the newly independent country. The Nigerians said, no, we will not be introduced by our former colonial masters. Instead, they asked the United States representative to introduce them. So that from the very beginning, there was this feeling of affinity with the United States. The first president of Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe, was educated here in the United States at Lincoln University. And as a result, many Nigerians came to the United States early on for their education. Now, the problem that Nigeria has had is that while it started off as a vigorous democratic society, 5 or 6 years after independence, there was a military coup. And Nigeria has been plagued by military coups through much of its history. It also underwent a civil war that lasted for 4 years and which resulted in a number of deaths and resulted in a fissure in the country, which is now seeing echoes of that today. And I guess we'll get to that later when we talk about the challenges which these countries face. Now, the other thing to understand about Nigeria, and one of the things that disturbs me, is the way in which it is reported in the United States without a recognition of the fact. I mean, everything that happens in Nigeria is reported in the United States as a struggle between Christians and Muslims, which is not the case. There are certainly a lot of problems, and we will get to those later. But Nigeria is unique in the sense that it is the only country in the world whose population is evenly divided between Muslims and Christians. And one would have expected that there would have been tensions that would have kept this country from ever really existing. It is now more than 50 years since its independence, and there has been incredible harmony between Christians and Muslims, with some very notable exceptions, which we will talk about later. And so Nigeria, I think, has had to overcome problems which I think would have sunk many a country in the world long before, except that in Nigeria you have had a constitution that was secular. You have had a belief in a secular kind of government. Now, the biggest problem was they had that the secularists were often military, which caused all kinds of problems. But since 1999, it has had civilian leadership, and that leadership, I think, has brought about a change in the country to the point where it's going to be very difficult for the military to intervene again. Thank you.
Now, Ambassador Matenja, you a moment ago were giving us a little context, taking us from the establishment of the Organization of African Unity to now the African Union, as a way of giving us some context for understanding trends and developments on the continent. As Ambassador Carrington alluded to a moment ago, that despite the progress in Malawi, the steady record of Botswana, the emergence of Nigeria, that all of these countries do have challenges. Could you all speak a moment and feel free to engage? Speak to some of the challenges that Malawi Botswana and Nigeria currently face?
Yes. In terms of challenges, maybe before going to the challenges, I should just speak briefly about what Malawi has done.
Good. Good.
I said earlier that there's a new beginning in Africa. And certainly in Malawi, we have recognized that that is very important. What we did was the first 31 years of our existence, we were under a single-party dictatorship, which did not respect human rights and did not give opportunities for everyone to participate in the management of the affairs of the state. But in 1993, Malawians said enough was enough. So they rebelled against the government then and demanded that we should change the system of government. So from 1994, we have a multi-party system of government. We held our first elections, democratic elections in 1994. And since then, we have held 4 free and fair elections. Unfortunately, none of those has been given enough publicity in the media, even out here. So, and we have also built democratic institutions. We have reformed our judiciary. We have established a law commission. We have established an office of the ombudsman. We have reformed some of our laws. We have a new constitution that is complete with a Bill of Rights, modeled on the Bill of Rights of the United States. Again, nobody speaks
That's right.
about those things out here. And yet these are positive developments that are putting some African countries on the road to success. And because of the environment we have created since 1994, Malawi now, before 2004, we were an importer of food, and yet we have arable land. But since 2004, we are now producing food over and above what we need. We are, in fact, even exporting that food to other countries. So you can see that we are making headway, and we have made...
You can't applaud that. That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
We have made agriculture and food security our #1 priority. And we have done so with our own resources, because most of our development partners, sadly including the United States, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, discouraged us from doing certain things which they thought would complicate our economic environment in Malawi. And that is, we should not subsidize poor farmers in the villages with cheap fertilizers, hybrid seeds, and pesticides. We went against that conventional wisdom, and my president literally challenged the IMF that if within 3 years Malawi was not going to feed itself, he was going to resign. And that was in 2004. And I'm happy to say that President Mutharika, my president, is still president today because he has proven that this can be done. The second thing we have done is that there is now donor fatigue, because of dwindling resources, what more with the financial crisis that occurred in 2007, 2008. We have told ourselves it's time to use our own resources. It's time to finance our recurrent budget from our own resources. If we are going to have donor financing or aid, it must go to development projects which can be accounted for, both to the donors and to the people of Malawi. So we are moving forward. There's new hope that we are moving from poverty to prosperity. I must also say that although Africa and Malawi have been characterized as poor, we have insisted in Malawi that Africa and Malawi and most African countries, including Botswana, are not poor countries. It is the people who are poor. But the countries themselves are rich in mineral resources. Botswana's diamonds. We have arable land. We have natural resources. We have a lake which is 365 miles long and 52 miles at its widest, with over 700 different species of fish. How do you call a country with those resources poor? So we are saying we are going to use our own resources in order to unleash the potential of the country and the potential of the people of Malawi. But we are first going to help the people by subsidizing what they need so that they can move forward like everybody else across the world. Coming to the challenges, I will just mention a few. The biggest challenge we have, or we face, is that Malawi, just like Botswana, is landlocked. The nearest, we use 3 ports in order to access the sea. 2 ports in in Mozambique, the port of Beira and the port of Nacala, and the port of Dar es Salaam. So we depend on road transportation for our imports and exports. And the cost of doing that, the cost of imports and exports, 1/3 of those costs goes to transportation. So it makes our products uncompetitive. So what we're trying to do now is to see how best, in collaboration with our neighbors, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and also in the region, in the Southern African region, we can develop infrastructure that would support the movement of people and goods in the region, and therefore facilitating trade amongst the countries in the region, as well as with countries outside. So the first problem we face is the fact that we are landlocked. The second point is the issue of climate change. I know there's a controversy. Some people don't believe about it. But for those of us who depend on agriculture, we know what climate change means. Mm-hmm. If rains don't come at the right time and in sufficient amounts, we are going to lose our crops. People will not be able to harvest their food and keep food for themselves. So the issue of climate change is real. It may not be real to others, but to us, it's a problem, it's a real issue. And it's a matter of concern. Poor villagers who depend on subsistence agriculture always will worry about whether rains are going to fall in any growing season. And that anxiety alone is an issue that we want to deal with effectively. The third challenge is the problem of HIV and AIDS. At one point, I think the infection rate was about over 30%. But now we have worked so hard since 1994 to tackle the problem, and now it has gone down to almost about maybe below 20%. HIV and AIDS has affected the way of life in Malawi. Almost everybody in Malawi is affected one way or another. Either you are infected, or you know someone who is infected, maybe a close relative or friends. It has killed people with potential, young men and young women, people who should be driving the economy forward. And this has been a real issue for Malawi and for many African countries. But we are working hard to making sure that we contain the problem. We are now putting our people on ARVs. I think now we are talking about over 800,000 people on ARVs. The government had decided to making sure that every woman who is pregnant must be given ARVs, so long as they test the CD count is, I think, below, whether or not it's below 250. They should be given ARVs to prevent the virus from getting into the fetus, and therefore preserving the baby from, preventing the baby from being infected. So we are doing all these wonderful things in order to contain these challenges. So I would, for the time being, just mention those 3 main challenges we have.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Stith.
Ambassador, good news is no news. So I think it is important also for people to realize that the media, by sensationalizing, that's how they make their money. That's how they sell the news. That's how they create sensation. From the American perspective, and believe you me, our countries work very well with the United States. We wouldn't be here if that was not the case. But sometimes I think there's a fear for brain drain, that if some of you were to be exposed to the goodness of what happens in Africa, you may not want to ever come back here. And then you'll go and improve us. So they instill fear, and this fear really works. 30 years ago, when I first came here, the sort of questions that I was being asked, so you people live on trees? And I would say yes. And the American ambassador, we have given him the highest tree that we have. So nowadays, globalization has brought especially young people like yourselves closer and knowing what methods of research to use. As I mentioned earlier, we all have challenges in Africa in the same way that the United States has challenges, or in worse ways than you have. All the problems that my colleague has talked about as problems and challenges, we don't want to call them problems, we want to call them challenges. As the challenges that they have in Malawi, we have them in Botswana, precisely and exactly. In addition to the drought, to the HIV/AIDS, and I dare add that Botswana is used as a model country for fighting HIV/AIDS. Whilst we were the hardest hit, and I guess maybe it has something to do with affluency, government went and took the problem to the very highest level at office of the president, and we have made tremendous gains. I was reading here the other time, and actually I participated in a panel discussion at Capitol Hill, where it was reported that in the United States, there are people who qualify to get ARVs and they are queuing. They are still not enrolled on the program. Luckily for us, with the help of our partners, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Merck, Harvard Institute, we've been able really, every dollar they have put in, the government has matched it 1-to-1. So in terms of HIV/AIDS, we have made quite remarkable results. One of our challenges in Botswana is dependence on government. Because government provides free education up to university level, from primary to university, free medical, old people get assistance, the orphans who were left by their parents, the government looks after them. So this too much dependence on government, as much as the social networks are important, it has also created a problem and a challenge for government. In Botswana, we no longer talk of democracy. We talk of participatory democracy. How do we ensure that all the various different interest groups are taken care of? How do we ensure that women, for instance, participate? We have a woman attorney general, a woman governor of the Reserve Bank, a woman of the speaker. In the businesses, private sector banks, we do have women heading. But when it comes to women in parliament, in politics, we are failing, and it's a shame, and it's something that we need to be working on. We need to be designing our buildings in such a way that the disabled people can get access to the buildings. So this is part of the participatory democracy that I'm talking about. The other challenge unique to Botswana is for being punished for doing well. We were told traditionally that if you have the rule of law, good governance, good human rights history, you are looking after your people, then FDI, or you are ranked by Moody's and Standard & Poor's at A, you'd see FDIs flowing. We have put all those in place, no FDIs. Instead of our partners saying, If you do like Botswana, this is the assistance we'll continue to give to you. They take it away. So that also makes a challenge, because even a good child, if your child is good, you give them a candy, you give them a sweet, and say to the others, if you do like this one, you see, I will reward you. Now, in politics and in governance, when somebody is doing well, they're being punished. We won't help you because you don't need help. Yes, we do need help, because now HIV/AIDS has reduced our life expectancy. It has affected our productivity level. We talk of centers of excellence. We need to learn the best of the practices so that we continue to be there. And therefore, we request and require of us, of our partners, to be able to recognize that and use us as a model, and to encourage their companies to come into us. Botswana played a very significant and important role in the whole of the SADC. The refugees were accepted in Botswana, running from Zimbabwe, from South Africa. We played a very important role. Our people lost their lives because they were assisting the refugees. Tolerance was in Botswana. Our first president was married to a white lady from England. In Botswana, we don't see color. So this equality that we taught, we had to teach it, not only to our neighbors, but to the rest of Africa. The peace talks, everything Botswana was always involved in. So there have been some sacrifices, and it's time that we call on our partners to pay back. The last challenge, dependence on one major resource. We are currently trying to improve our tourism. You know, we are 2.5 million people. We have cattle more than people. In Botswana, if a man has no cattle, we ask 2-3 questions that what kind of a man is he? So we have these challenges because we depend on diamonds, but they are not forever. We need to diversify our economy such that when the life of the mines comes to an end, we'll still be able to run and take the country forward.
Thank you. Ambassador Carrington, you alluded to some of the challenges in Nigeria. Give us a summary of some of what you see from the outside looking in and from the inside looking out.
All right, let me try to put this in some kind of context, because unlike the experiences in the SADC nations, in West Africa and in North Africa, there is a different dynamic at play. I remember how upset I would get after September 11th, 2001, listening to the talking heads on television, speaking about the Muslim world and making these tremendous generalizations. They would get people from the Middle East, from other places who would talk about these things and say, oh, you know, talking about the incompatibility of Islam with democracy and all of this. And then the American reporters would ask, you know, when will there ever be democracy in an Islamic state? Is there a incompatibility between Islam and democracy? And I would listen and remember that I had lived for 12 years in African countries, which I had never thought about until after September 11th, that in fact, I've been telling people I've been living 12 years in African countries. I've been living 12 years in Muslim countries, and never thought of it while I was there any more than before September 11th. You know, one would go to Europe and visit countries. You don't think of the fact that you're in Europe, you're in a Christian country, but yet people did not understand the dynamic in Africa. Do you know that there are more Muslims in sub-Saharan Africa than there are in the whole Arab world. That Nigeria alone has more Muslims than any country in the Arab world, with the single exception of Egypt, which has maybe 1 million more. But no other country has even a third as many Muslims as Nigeria has. And that when people were talking about the incompatibility of Islam and democracy, you had countries like Senegal, 90% Muslim, with a secular government. In fact, its first president, its founding president, their great hero, was a Roman Catholic. And this is true in so many other countries in Africa, where you do not have the Islamic State. You have instead states where you have heads of state who are Muslim, or countries who are 90%, but yet have been practicing democracy and recognize the value of the secular state. Now, the problem that I think that Africa has in so many areas is the fact that so many people from the outside, experts, come to Africa with what I call the tempting template, which they want to impose upon the continent. They've got these great theories, and that somehow the continent must fit into them. And therefore, they often misinterpret. And that gets us to Nigeria. Nigeria has tremendous problems. It has corruption that is just endemic, and which I think more than anything else has held it back. Ambassador Seretse, I'm always grateful to Botswana for the beacon that you have been in Africa. During the times when we were fighting the United States friendly relationships with the apartheid government of South Africa, we could always point to countries like Botswana as what could happen when you have democratic rule in your country. Now, the problem in a place like Nigeria is that today, in addition to the corruption which is so prevalent among the elite in the country, and which has squandered so much of the resources, you talk about Africa being a rich continent. There is no country which has more richness in natural resources than Nigeria. And in addition to that, it also has a richness of human resources. It has the most educated, the most intelligent people on the continent. And in fact, in this country, Nigerians tend to exceed in every field in which they enter, and yet they have so much trouble when they go back to the country itself. Now, we are all aware, I'm sure all of you have read about what is going on in the northern part of the country today. The northern part of Nigeria is mostly Muslim, and there has recently been the development of a group called the Boko Haram. Haram in Arabic means forbidden, and people have loosely translated Boko Haram to mean Western education is forbidden or sinful, etc. And the Boko Haram, which represented in the beginning a very, very small group within the north, has now become larger, and people from the outside. In fact, I was reading an article today in the Financial Times of London about what is going on in Nigeria. You may have heard about what has happened with the petroleum with oil. You know, Nigeria, as rich as it is in oil, does not have any working refineries. And so there's a great shortage of oil in the country. All of the oil is sent out. And so the prices, if they were left to the market for gasoline, would go way up. And so the government has long had a subsidy. And recently there have been demonstrations throughout the country opposed to the government taking away the subsidy. As a result of the success of those demonstrations, much of the subsidy has been returned. But the way it has been interpreted in so many places in the press, not only in the American press but in the British press, is that Nigeria is now experiencing the Occupy movement from the United States, being influenced by it. It is also experiencing the Arab Spring, both of which are wrong. By the way, the whole idea of the term the Arab Spring, for someone who lived for 2 years in Tunisia, the uprising in Tunisia began in December, and December in Tunisia is not the spring. I rather refer to it as the winter of Arab discontent. Unfortunately, not made glorious summer yet in so many of those countries. When I was in Nigeria, even during the time of the worst of their military dictators, there were still demonstrations when, for example, the election of the president was annulled by the military government. There were riots all over the country. When the government then tried to raise the price of oil to the people, there were demonstrations which the government thought were going to bring them down. So that Nigeria did not need any examples from the outside to spur them on in terms of their discontent with the government. And what you see today is a discontent over the most recent elections. Now, there is a problem in Nigeria, mostly in the north, and what worries me is that if it ever comes to the south, that's when you've got real problems in Nigeria, because the south represents sort of the canary in the coal mine. Muslims and Christians have lived together in the southwest of Nigeria, among the Yoruba, which are one of the largest groups in the country, for years. I mean, it is impossible to tell who is a Muslim and who is a Christian by the name of the person. In most countries, in most societies, people who become Muslims adopt Arabic names. Not so with the Yorubas. Their tradition, their culture is so strong that they keep their Yoruba names. They do not change them. When I first went to Nigeria in 1958, 2 years before independence, I was leading a group for the Experiment in International Living, taking students to live with Nigerian families all around the country. My counterpart there, who later became the Minister of Education and a big figure in the country, Bobs Fafenwa, was a person who I was very close to, and I did not know until I went back as ambassador that Bobs, in fact, was a Muslim. You cannot tell by one's name, or even you can't certainly tell by the clothes they wear who is Muslim, who is Christian. So that you've had in Nigeria generally a harmonious relationship between Christians and Muslims in most parts of the country. The Boko Haram problem is worrying, but the idea that Boko Haram is somehow associated with Al-Qaeda, et cetera, is wrong. But it is, again, a way we in the West tend to look at these things, not as phenomena peculiar to the country, but somehow related to what is going on in the rest of the world. And I see you want to.
Well, I mean, I'm totally focused in here, but I do want to expand the conversation.
Right.
Because that's how we build it, and I'm sure that there are those in the room with us tonight who have questions that they'd like to raise as well. So we'll open this conversation up. We have mics available, yes. Here's one here. Let's start with right here in the purple
Hi,
shirt here.
My name is Katie, and I wanted to thank you for your conversation. I actually was a Peace Corps volunteer in Zambia, so your neighbors. I've been to both of your countries, and they're beautiful. And I just wanted to ask a question about, as America, we tend not to recognize maybe the potential of African nations for business and for future economic gains, but I think that one country that is recognizing that is China. And I think that there, at least in Zambia, was a very tumultuous relationship. And I was hoping that, in particular, the ambassadors could talk a little bit about how you feel that China is both adding and taking away from your country's economies. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Are you going to take several?
Well, that might be a good idea. Let's take several questions, and then we've got one. We've got somebody. Do we have a second mic? Okay, let's do one more over here, and then we'll pick up one here as well.
All right. Good evening. My name is Arnie Hamari. I'm a grad student here at BU in International Relations. It's great to have a panel on Africa. It's always great to talk about a place I love. I spent the last year in Senegal, and there's been a lot of discussion about the upcoming elections. About 2 hours ago, the Senegalese Constitutional Council decided that President Wade can run for a third term, which has caused a lot of protests, and they've already started burning Dakar and Kaolack and a couple other cities in the country. There's a lot of unrest. People are talking about this may be the end of democracy in Senegal. So I'd like to get the view of the panelists on what they think is the future of Senegal, what they can do to possibly help it maintain its democratic traditions, and what we could possibly see in the future. Thank you.
Good.
Hi, my name is Amy. I just graduated from Tufts studying international relations. Thank you for being with us here tonight, ambassadors. Like we've talked about tonight, the media really portrays Africa in a very sensationalist way, with focusing on conflict and health crises. And I wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind enlightening us about the resilience of the people, with maybe an example from each country of something that you think of when you think of the resilience in like social groups in your country, or women or families displaying strength and the ability to live in difficult circumstances and prevail. So I wanted to ask if you could be our media tonight for a few minutes and just give us a few snapshots of resilience. So thank you.
Okay. We've got three questions here. China, its impact on the economy and politics in Africa.
Yes.
Senegal, the seductiveness of staying in office even though your time is up. Resilience, and we're not talking about that kind of resilience. Your Excellencies,
yes.
respond.
Coming to the question of business, if you look at the IMF World Bank stats, the projections are that in the next 5 years, the growth is going to be coming out of Africa. So that in itself, it's sending a message to anyone who has a high appetite for investment. President Obama has coined the term Africa on the move, and that is a mouthful. On the move because of the economic growth, on the move because of stability and democracies emerging, and on the move of wanting to create excellence wherever they find it. And it is very unfortunate and regrettable that this on the move doesn't translate to American businesses. When South Africa was practicing apartheid, there was boycott of American businesses into South Africa. When South Africa got its independence, there was, I think, also a sort of a guilty conscience of saying we have deprived them and have affected the people, so therefore let us make concessions so that they can go into South Africa. But those concessions needed to have been made not only for South Africa, but for any African countries which was following on the democratic principles as defined in the United States. But unfortunately, it didn't translate through to the rest of Africa. So today, when you do an analysis of where American businesses are in Africa, you find that they are significant mostly in two countries, predominantly in South Africa and predominantly in Nigeria. Now, the American economy is ailing. It makes better sense for expansion from a business perspective that anyone wanting to expand should expand where there is going to be growth, because it's going to give higher profits which are going to filter back because people are going to repatriate their profits to whatever country of their choice from where they are investing. Yes, indeed, China has come big time to Africa. It has found the Africans very hungry, their appetite high for investment. They have dangled carrots in all sorts of places in terms of infrastructure, clean water, technology. Who is going to be starving and not accept that? Let's be practical. So Africa has come with this high appetite for Chinese product, Chinese goods, and the tide aid, which they have also come with it. We will do a bridge for you, but we want a Chinese company to be the one bridging it. The unfortunate thing is, however, that the human rights records and the labor practices in a lot of instances are not the American first world that a country like Botswana and Malawi would like to see. In certain instances, also coming up with corruption here and there, but at least in a lot of countries now, they are being watched vigilantly. In conclusion, what am I saying? I am saying that as a Botswana ambassador to the United States, my patronage is to two countries, to Botswana firstly, and to the United States. And I would therefore, as an ambassador here in this country, hate to see my other country losing to China, which I like very much, which I respect. And by the way, diplomatically, we are not allowed to be speaking about other countries. So we should be asking the question that what is the United States doing about the growth that is coming out of Africa in terms of giving incentive to the American business to go to Africa? Because we don't want you to lose the position as world leader. The question about Senegal, and I have an expert on Senegal, it's not just Senegal alone. You know, they say too much power corrupts. So, but let me tell you that also power is a nice thing, you know, and a lot of people are tasting it and enjoying the things which come with power. I don't think he's the only person who has tried to change the constitution. I think we have seen it in one or two countries in the SADC region, but take comfort in knowing that a lot of the countries have now put a limit to the parliamentary term, and in Botswana, for instance, it's 2 terms. In Malawi, it's also 2 terms. But in certain countries, people had to fight to make sure that it's 2 terms. They had to fight to make sure that the constitutions are not changed. I would be very surprised if it goes through, and I would be extremely surprised if it goes through. But it is a phenomenon that we are going to see over time until these infant democracies mature and they settle. I have talked enough.
I think the ambassador of Botswana has answered perfectly well on the first question about business between Africa and the United States, so I don't think I should say anything more than what she said. Regarding the issue of Senegal, of course, it's up to the people of Senegal to decide what they want. If this was going to be done through a democratic process, and people agree that there should be change, President Wade should be given another term, it's up to them to decide. But if the process is not going to be democratic, and the president forces himself on his people, then there's a problem. But talking about my own country, we went through that problem. In 2004, our first president, democratically elected president, was put to power in 1994 when we switched from dictatorship to pluralism. He was accredited for entrenching human rights in Malawi and helping to establish democratic institutions in Malawi. Unfortunately, when his second term came to an end, he wanted to do exactly what the question is saying. Wanted to have the constitution amended because it provided for 2 terms of 5 years each, have it amended, first so that the limits should be removed completely. It should be open-ended. When the people resisted, he then said, well, we'll limit it to 3 terms. So let's just amend the constitution one time so that there should be an opportunity for a president to serve a 3rd term. Everybody resisted. A bill was prepared, was tabled in Parliament. He lost by 2 votes. And that was the end of the issue. As a result, his credibility just plummeted. The respect people had for him suddenly just disappeared because of just that one single desire to do what everybody else had rejected. So we have experienced it, we have resisted, and you can see that at least in the case of Malawi, democracy has come to stay. And it will not change, we will just continue on the democratic process we have embarked upon. And I must also say that my own president, President Mutharika, his second term is finishing in 2014. He has said more than once that come 2014, he will pack up his bags, go to his village and rest, and allow somebody else to continue. So as we are now, we know that come 2014, we will not be bothered by someone wanting to change the constitution in order to have a 3rd term. So in the case of Malawi, that's how we dealt with. Thank you.
He did promise to come and spend some time at Boston University, too, by the way, after he finishes his term.
Right.
Walter.
One of the great things about being a former ambassador is that you don't have to worry about talking about other countries. I think the saddest thing I've heard today is what you said about what has just happened in Senegal. And if that was the verdict of the Supreme Court, then I'm doubly sad. Because when I was serving in Senegal, I had the great privilege of attending a ceremony on New Year's Eve in the Supreme Court of Senegal, where the president of Senegal, Léopold Sédar Senghor, whom I mentioned before, the first president, a great poet, a great intellectual, who was very popular, could have remained president for as long as he wanted, decided that the only way that democracy could survive was if he did not stay on and if every African leader, after serving a couple of terms, would leave. And so he voluntarily left, and it was this great ceremony at the Supreme Court where his constitutionally designated successor took over. Now, this is quite different from what is happening now, and it is ironic that Senghor's strongest opponent, I remember President Ward storming into my office at one time, complaining about the United States' relationship and friendship with Senghor, and how he, if his party got in, it would be different. Well, of course, it is quite different in the sense that they are about to destroy a democracy in Senegal, and I think, unfortunately, that's going to be one of those bad headlines that you've got there, because I cannot imagine that the Senegalese people, who have built up this great democracy, which, along with Botswana, Mauritius, and at one time the Gambia, were the only 4 democracies in Africa. There are many more now. If Senegal now reverts to that kind of authoritarian rule, I think we are all the poorer for it. Mm-hmm. Now, I think one of the things we haven't given any attention to the question about resilience of the people and the groups. And one of the things that always impressed me in Nigeria during a time of tremendous military oppression was civil society and their resilience and their standing up for democratic rights, and so many of them being thrown in jail for their resistance, and that people in that country remain resilient in spite of all that's going on. Now, one of the great perquisites of my stay in Nigeria was that I met my current wife there. She's Nigerian, and so I'm always, my in-laws are always telling me about what's going on there. And it's the resilience of the people of Africa that is really so inspiring, that in spite of terrible economic conditions, they still manage to soldier on, to keep their heads above water and try to change the conditions in which they find themselves.
Thank you. Let me, I'm moderating, but let me respond to this question of resilience, and I want to tie it to governance. I want to tie the two together very quickly, but I want to preface it with a very general point. I've worked a lot with presidents in Africa, but I've also worked a lot with presidents in the United States as well. And it led me to coin an expression that I use quite often when talking about political leaders. And it's this, that power is a seductive mistress. And once she's kissed you on the lips, it's hard to walk away. I've never met a president who wouldn't overstay his welcome if that were possible. Bill Clinton is a very dear friend of mine. There's no doubt in my mind that if he could have run for a 3rd term, he would have run. And won. That's true, and would have won. So that's just a general axiom to give context, because at one level it's an issue of human nature. But to tie governance and resilience together, when we started 10 years ago, there were 11 democratically retired African heads of state. Let me even back up. When we started the center, the Wall Street Journal did an article and said that we were about to establish a rest home for retired dictators. And said, after Mandela, who could you bring? Well, at that time, there were 11 democratically retired African heads of state. Today, there are 33. Today, there are 33 retired African heads of state. And what that would suggest related to this issue of resilience is that there is a vibrancy to democracy on the continent, and it is taking root. And it's taking root because you do have civil society that's committed to it, but you also have a generation of leadership that understands that the future of their countries is going to be best secured by democratic governance. We've got time for a few more questions. Have we got our mic on this side? Let's get this young woman here.
Hello, I'm Farida. I'm from Cameroon, and I had a question. And you said that there's a lot of problem with brain drain. How about young people who want to go back? What advice would you give to them about helping the continent and the country move forward?
Good, good. Let's get here.
Throughout history, religion has served as a source of conflict, but after hearing the state of Nigeria, it seems that it doesn't have to be so. So my question is, what role can religion play, and what role will it play in the future?
Excellent. Let's take one more. Go ahead, right here.
Thank you again for being here. I just kind of wanted to touch on the role that the International Criminal Court has had on the continent of Africa. I know in December, Malawi, there's a little tiff there going on with non-commitment, perhaps, that the ICC was upset about with al-Bashir's indictment. So if you could maybe talk about people talking about Africa feeling like they may be victimized by the ICC, and what you think the role between the ICC, the appropriate role and respectful role and mutually beneficial role that the ICC and Africa should have together.
There was
Okay.
this young lady here.
Lady and gentlemen, why don't we take a crack at those three?
The issue of what young people can do. You know, the issue of brain drain, sometimes I think it balances itself out. Botswana government, for instance, not just here in the United States, but in Australia, in the UK, they have a lot of young people who were paid for by government who have decided to stay in those countries. It is upsetting because we invested so much in them, but if they are working, it is a plus because hopefully they are learning best practices, which they would eventually take back to Botswana and improve the country. But I was talking about brain drain from an aspect that if today all of you were educated enough about countries in Africa, it raised your levels of curiosity sufficient to make you go there, and you would, quote unquote, feel at home there, you probably want to stay there. And I am not so sure, Ambassador, that the United States would very much like a thing like that. That we have had 50 students from Boston who have finished, went there touring, and now have decided to go and work there, and the jobs are there waiting for them because they are qualified. It would be very worrisome, because whilst we come as ambassadors and talk about American businesses going to invest in our countries, President Obama is talking about creating incentives for those companies to stay in the United States. So it's not a fight, but all we are saying is that go there, see what difference you can make, and see how appreciated your contribution can be. So I think young people like yourselves can, starting by student exchanges, starting by student tours, you can go to different African countries just to see. Because you know, going in any strange place, You learn by not being in the classroom. So all we are appealing to you is go and see. Don't let the media create so much fear in you that you don't have incentive to go and see the difference. So that America is not the world. America is a country. There are millions of countries which are doing a lot of good things. Go and see, you are educated, fly, you know. That's how some of us became to be where we are, because we're not fearful to come to America. That is true. 30 years back, you know, I get disappointed when I speak to somebody and they say they don't have a passport, because automatically they are telling me that they haven't traveled, you know. And what are they saying when they say they haven't traveled? You know, you need to travel. And as an American passport holder, by the way, in Botswana, we don't require a visa out of you. We have taken care of malaria, so you know, the lions, you won't see the lions in Gaborone. We'll take you to where the lions are, you know. The issue about religion, you know, Africans, it doesn't matter where, they are very, very religious people, extremely religious. Going to church, all of us were forced at some point to go to Sunday school. We also forced our children, so from generation to generation. And it is good that religion is there, because religion also increases resilience. It creates hope for a better future. When things are not going right, religion tells you, if you pray hard, you know, things would get right. So you find people who do not have food, but remember to pray every evening. So religion is good. It's good in governance, and it should be allowed. That freedom of religion must be practiced and not only be put in constitution. So it should be allowed that people should practice their religion, whichever religion it is, without adding value to saying which one is better and which one is not better. I think it goes almost hand in hand to freedom of association. And if you take it away, you are basically denying that freedom of association as well. The ICC, I know, is meant for you, my brother, but to just comment, to say that generally speaking, as you know, the statute which creates the ICC, countries sign on to them. A lot of our members recognize the ICC in the same way that we recognize the United Nations. But I think some countries have complained that don't take away the jurisdiction of the countries to try certain criminals which have been perpetrated against their own people, and just do the ICC and let the local law, where applicable, to apply. But help me.
Yes, before I come to the ICC issue, maybe let's just speak briefly about the issue of religion, and I hope I understood the question correctly. In most African countries, and certainly in Malawi, religion has played a very positive role in the development of the country. Religious groups are running schools. I went to a high school run by the Roman Catholic Church. So I benefited quite a lot from the education I received at the time. And the religious groups also run and manage hospitals. They are involved in the democratic governance of Malawi. When we were changing from a single-party system of government to pluralism in 1994, all the religious groups, including Muslims for that matter, took an active role, writing pastoral letters, criticizing the government then, putting pressure on the government, speaking on behalf of the voiceless, the people in the villages. And one of the pastoral letters which literally brought down the government then was issued by the Roman Catholic Church. And that is what killed off the government at that time. And unfortunately for the government then, they almost wanted to arrest the bishops. But the whole country rallied behind them, and then we had the change. So religious organizations in Malawi have played a very, very important role. And also, every year, our independence, we celebrate our independence on 6th July every year. United States on the 4th. But every year, 2 days or 3 days before celebrating the independence, all the religious groups come together, including Muslims, to conduct a joint national day of worship. All of them, Muslims, Christians, Roman Catholics, Presbyterians, Seventh-day Adventists, Buddhists, all of them, they come together to pray because we believe we are all, we want to have a common destiny. So I can confirm in the case of Malawi, religion is a very important aspect of our life. Of course, the Malawi Constitution guarantees freedom of religion. Nobody is forced to join any denomination or to pray in a particular way. Everybody is free whether they want to become Muslims. I know Muslims have married Christians. Some of my own relatives have married, I'm a Christian, but some of my own relatives have married Muslims. Our second president, the one we elected in 1994, the one who wanted to amend the Constitution, was a Muslim. And Malawi is predominantly a Christian country, almost 98% Christian. Only about maybe 3% are Muslims, and then the rest traditional religions. So you can see it is the Christians who elected this man, the president, a Muslim, to be the president of Malawi. And nobody talked about the religion. Of course, there were fears that he was going to Islamize Malawi. But he never did that. In fact, instead, he would even join Christians at, for example, celebrating Easter. He would go and join Christians in church and read from the Bible. So I just want to confirm that, at least for Malawi, the issue of religion is something which doesn't bother us at all. Coming down to the issue of the ICC, the whole issue of the ICC, I think, came about when President al-Bashir of Sudan visited Malawi last year to attend a regional trade meeting for, I think, about 16, 17 countries who form what we call the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa. So he came to Malawi for less than a day to attend that meeting. Of course, we were under pressure to arrest him because he has been indicted by the ICC. And therefore, because Malawi is a signatory to the Rome Statute establishing the ICC, we were under an obligation to arrest him. But we told the international community that Sudan is not a member of the ICC. And therefore, as far as we were concerned, after examining the legal framework, governing the ICC and the United Nations, and also governing the, after examining the treaties, which establish immunities for heads of state, we said we did not have any legal basis for arresting a visiting foreign head of state, a sitting head of state, because he was immune from prosecution, from arrest, at least under customary international law. Of course, the ICC and other countries disagreed with us, but that was the legal basis upon which we said we could not arrest al-Bashir. That did not mean to say that we support genocide or crimes against humanity or war crimes, the crimes with which he was indicted by the ICC. Far from it, because we negotiated the Rome Statute ourselves, and we were in the forefront mobilizing support for African countries to sign up to the Rome Statute. Right now, there are about 33 countries, African countries, that are members of the ICC, demonstrating that we don't support impunity. Unfortunately, and that is what is bothering us, is that the major countries such as the United States, China, and Russia, which are also permanent members of the UN, are not members of the ICC. I've told the US government, look, we look to the United States to lead in the process of ending impunity. But if the US is outside the ICC, what do you expect the rest of us to do? By the way, as I understand it, and I stand to be corrected, Ambassador Stith, I understand the US actually signed the Rome Statute when President George Bush was in office. But, no, when I think President Clinton was in office. But when President George Bush came into office, he rescinded the signature of the United States, and therefore putting the future of the ICC into question. So the rest of us who are members are saying, look, we need to have the support of the big powers. Well, the ICC has referred us to the Security Council of the UN. I don't know what they want the Security Council to do, because we are saying if three members of the three permanent members of the Security Council are not signatories to the ICC, how are they going to judge or determine, the fate of a president of a country that is also not a member of the ICC? And can states which are outside the ICC by themselves determine the immunity of, heads of state of countries which are also not a member of the ICC? So in our own interpretation of the law, we came to the conclusion that it is only leaders of countries that are members of the ICC who have given up their immunity and who can be arrested.
Good.
So that was the basis upon which we did not arrest Bashir. So we are waiting for the Security Council to make a decision. Of course, we are going to fight our case should we be allowed to address the Security Council when they'll be discussing this issue.
It is now 7 minutes after 8. My, how time flies when you're having fun, right? This has been an extraordinary evening for us. We've appreciated and enjoyed it immensely. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to stand. And let's give them a rousing round of applause. Cheers. We're here. We're here. Now give yourselves a rousing round of applause for your participation and those great questions. Thank you.